Okay, welcome. So today is our move into stillness meeting, in case we didn't know that based on the attendance. It's funny, I was thinking, I've been evaluating whether to continue with the move into stillness meetings or not, or whether to if they would fold in more they would fold in better into some other offering that I currently have. And I thought I had resolved one way, and then I thought I resolved the other way, and then we'll see what happens. But so let's start at the beginning. What is our intention? What is the purpose of this meeting? What is it that's meant by, well, it's not in the title, but this meeting is an exploration of somatics. So what is that? What is somatics? Now, if you were to Google somatics, you would come up with all kinds of things, I suppose. But popularly, you might kind of zero in on the notion that somatics is just like a therapeutic field for the body. It's a way of feeling better. It's a way of relieving pain and enabling a person to move more freely. And there is a certain level of truth to that, but it's very superficial. And so if you cling to that superficial level of understanding, you'll get superficial results, most likely. Or let's put it a different way, which is if you want more fulfilling results, then I will invite you to consider a more a deeper investigation of what somatics is. So in order to understand this, first of all, I want to share with you my own personal interest in it is that it was born out of an insight. And I should, that makes it too simplistic, like it was just one insight, a series of insights over many years, but or an ongoing revelation of insights throughout a lifetime, but that pointed me to the direct realization or revelation, my own experience, my own life, that the way in which I was holding myself was synonymous with my experience. So what I mean by that is that I had believed up to a certain point that my experience or my experience was a material phenomenon, that it was and it was or that it was purely intellectual phenomenon, but that it was somehow divorced from the totality. And after self-examination, that no longer was a tenable notion, because what I saw was that when I felt bad, I was holding myself in a bad way. And so I realized that this separation that I had previously perceived was just a mental construct, that it was an illusion, and that my actual experience revealed something different, that my actual experience revealed unity, connection in all experience. And so I began to examine that more and more. And so Thomas Hanna, who I often refer to, I would say, had perhaps a similar insight. I won't say the same insight because I think Hannah and I probably don't see eye to eye on certain things, but he made the observation because he was a philosophy professor, and he traveled around the world, and he made an observation that wherever he went, uh, the people there held themselves in different ways. They walked in different ways. Their postures were different. Their mannerisms were different. That the you could say that the culture is manifest uh, in the way in which the people carry themselves. So the culture is not simply a language, although it is a language, and it's not simply the arts, and though it is the arts, and it's not just the um, metaphysical beliefs, but it's also something that is embodied that we can actually feel and observe. And so he was able to observe that in places where there was, let's say, political repression, that there was that repression was embodied. And so um, the idea then was that uh, there must be some way in which we can liberate ourselves from the from that which otherwise would eventually, in some form or fashion, would end up being oppressive to our freedom, to some sort of greater truth. So it's a radical notion because it really is. It is um, in some ways you could say it's. In some ways you could say it's. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a believer in anarchy, but you could say it's almost an anarchist notion because it's that there's the possibility for, we could say, like a divine revelation uh, through the direct experience that doesn't have to be mediated through some kind of rational thought or through some kind of religious institution or through some kind of cultural norms, but that it can be directly discovered. So maybe that puts it in a bigger context to understand how it can be um, such a revolutionary and at the same time a very practical um, notion that can be of real value for us in our lives. Because yes, it can help you to feel better in your body, but it's and that's no small thing. But it also offers you something much richer than that. Because if we limit it only to the body, and then we're still staying within an old framework in which there's a belief in a fundamental separation and a belief in that I am fundamentally separate, that I have to, and furthermore, that this is a mechanical universe that's devoid of soul. So that I am an alien in an alien reality. And so this is, I think, the thing that many people struggle with, and it's hostile to well-being. So the notion here is, and I just want to kind of contextualize it, and I'm not necessarily meaning to represent anybody else's views here other than mine at this moment, is that the Soma is, I want you to understand, is a way of perceiving. It is a way of relating. It is a way of understanding that is at once distinct from all other modes and categories, and at the same time, it it's right at the center, and so it integrates everything else. You know what I mean by that is that we all, I think, maybe know that we cannot think our way to freedom. In fact, maybe we can see that uh, trying to think our way to freedom is the very thing that binds us. And it's not that hard to see how much of what we would consider to be evil in the world is the product of thinking, but not soul or heart. And so we have this, you know, but nonetheless, we are often uh, uh, that's our default position, is thinking. And to just put that in context, think about this: that for um, for since ancient times, humans um, have have related with nature, and the way in which humans have related with nature has changed depending on the time and the place. But we could maybe make broad generalizations and say that non westernized societies through all time have tended to emphasize, or we could say, non uh, what would be considered primitive cultures have been uh, embedded in nature, that they have had an intimate, direct relationship with nature, and a recognition of their oneness with nature. So, um, but in contrast to that, we have been over many hundreds of years, and particularly now in our day and age, it's we assume that there are these transcendent, rational, uh, what we consider science, um, ideas, or some sort of uh, realm of um, what we would consider to be like abstract, transcendent ideas, so that we can tap into those and use those for all of these amazing things to conquer nature. So you look at like humans going to the moon. This is not an act of it's not an act of nature communing with nature. It's an act of the the rational mind divorced from nature, conquering nature. And to look at how that affects you today, I'm making this, it's kind of roundabout, but see how, for example, uh, through the vast majority of human history, overwhelming majority of human history, human healthcare has been a relationship with nature. And so that could be uh, shamanistic practices. It could also be herbalism of any different varieties, including in a shamanistic context or in a non-shamanistic context. But nonetheless, the herbs historically have all been understood to be uh, mm, let's say nature expressions of nature. And now when herbs are used for health or well-being, they are typically viewed through the lens of materialism, which is to say that that the material reality is completely divorced from anything else. And so the herbs are analyzed for their active properties and or their active principles and things, the active ingredients. It's all viewed through a chemical lens, so that St. John's wort is said to be uh, helpful for certain types of depression, and therefore, because science tells us that depression is caused by a deficiency in serotonin, must be that St. John's wort has some active ingredient that has an effect on serotonin. I'm pointing this out because I want you to see how boxed in we have become, in which we're looking at everything through a particular lens. And it's all through this rational mind, so that everything has to be justified to the rational mind. Otherwise, we say, well, it can't be real. It can't be effective. It can't help me. It can't be the real answer. You see, this is true. I mean, everything, we say, oh, well, how remarkable that the Buddhists for thousands of years have known something of real value when they didn't have science. But now science can validate it. What, thank what? We don't know. Thank something. Thank science. With the brain studies and so forth, we can show, oh, how remarkable that these primitive people were able to discover something that actually works. But they can only be shown to actually work because of science. So it's insulting on the one, certainly, but also, unfortunately, it's harmful to those of us who accept it unquestioningly. So my invitation here is to really understand that this is an invitation to explore in a radically different way. That yes, we invariably make reference to our usual modes of thinking, which are conceptual. And that's probably inevitable, and it's the way in which we communicate. And so when we even to speak of any of these things is going to necessitate that we speak in a certain way that is provocative of that way of perceiving, but nonetheless come back over and over and over to this radical notion that you can perceive somatically. So Thomas Hanna defined a soma, and he says a soma has, and I'm not necessarily saying that this is the definition or the only definition, but it's Thomas Hanna's definition, which I am aware of, that I can share with you. He says a soma has dimensionality, so it can, for example, that you can well, we'll say that Soma moves in three dimensions, or maybe we could say 4 dimensions, but we could say the first dimension is verticality. So we think about newborn infant, can't stand up, but can't sit up either. But we develop this ability of verticality because it's intrinsic in the soma. The soma is what, in this way of understanding things, the soma is that which animates the physical body. So the soma, it is, we'd say, interpenetrates the physical body, but it's also distinct from. So, but it's what animates the body. So this is known since ancient times. This has been something that people have been curious about, because they say, well, look, this body at some point we know is going to, we say there's a death, and we want to know, well, what is that? Because we all can recognize that something has happened, but what is that just happened? Because at that moment we say there's death. That person, we say, has passed. They're no longer in this body. Their presence is no longer here. So we're acknowledging that something about that person is not just the physical body, because at that very moment, the physical body is still here. Well, we say, but the body is no longer animated. The heart's not beating. The nerve impulses are not occurring. So they said, well, okay, so there's some kind of animating force, a vital force, or a prana or chi. Okay, so there's some kind of thing, but then we want to know, but well, what is that? And is that And what is it that causes that to come into the body, and what is it that causes it to depart from the body? And when it's here, what gives it direction? These are pretty fundamental questions that if you think about, okay, it's really interesting that humans can send people to the moon, um, and do all these other very interesting, complex things, but something so fundamental to our existence we overlook. We say, yeah, whatever. That surely that's already been, somebody's already answered that, onward and upward to the next great scientific discovery. But look, these are fundamental questions that great minds, we could say, uh, for all eternity, have dedicated themselves to. No minor thing. So Hannah proposes that we something. He's not saying he knows everything about it, but he's proposing some qualities of this thing. He's calling it a Soma. So this Soma, he says, which animates the body, already intrinsic in it is this verticality. So how is it that the baby is able to eventually sit? How does that notion even arise? And it's because it's inherent in the Soma. The Soma already knows about verticality. Similarly, the Soma knows about forward and backward, which is why we're able to move forward and backward. And the Soma knows about, not in these terms, of course, but right and left, side to side. So I suppose so. Then, but also, he says a Soma also has a, well, this is implicit in forward and backward, is that there's in order for there to be a forward and a backward, there has to be a front and a back. So a Soma is not just an amorphous blob. Maybe it's an amorphous blob, but not entirely, because it has a face, so to speak. Because we know that there's forward and we know there's a backward. You know that your front side is your front side and your back side is your back side. Now, from a materialist perspective, people will say, well, that the function is what determines that. It's rather the structure determines that. There's just a physical face, that you're nothing other than a physical body with some chemical processes. So that's one way to look at it, but I'm proposing that's a way that leads to a deadening, a numbness, or what in Hannah's terms we would call sensory motor amnesia. If you refuse to be present to yourself as a Soma, which I'm inviting you to do right now. So really, I'm hope that you're understanding this is not just a lecture, it's an invitation for you to explore your experience. So you can notice that, yes, you do know of forward and backward. Even if you close your eyes, you know about forward and backward. It's not determined just by the structure. There's something intrinsic in an unseen sense, that, or in a non-physical sense, that knows about having a front and a back. And Hannah also says a Soma moves in time. So it moves in a fourth dimension. And, interestingly, we could also we could really investigate that, rather than just taking that as some interesting fact. We could really look to see how that's true. And we might start to discover something really interesting, which is that perhaps we have some kind of volition in regard to this fourth dimension. Because most of the time we think that, no, we're just bound. We're forced to move forward in time. And I won't deny that there's some, that's a truthful way of seeing it in one way. So we don't have to look at it in black and white terms, but rather just to start to see that there are multiple, uh, perhaps equally useful or valid ways of perceiving. And so we want to have flexibility in our modes of perception so that we're not locked in to one thing, which in some situation may end up being um, troublesome to us. So just see that, okay, yes, your body seems to be getting older, and yes, you seem to uh, acquire information that builds upon information from the past, and so there seems to be a kind of some sort of um, one way uh, relationship with time. But also notice that your relationship with time is, uh, if you're not thinking about it, but instead you're perceiving it somatically. So you don't know maybe what that means, but you can start to explore it. Just be curious about it and notice, it's just like a curiosity. What would it mean to experience time somatically? So now we can start to also investigate what is it to experience somatically. So we've talked about some of the characteristics of a soma according to Hannah, which you can hopefully observe in your own experience. Even with eyes closed, you have a sense of these three dimensions of space, and you also have a sense of time. So there's an interesting clue about how you could start to enter into time somatically, is that you could uh, notice, if you with your eyes closed, you could start to notice that you have a we could say a felt sense, or a non um, not involved in thought, but a directly felt sense of time. So just you can tune into that without having to reach a conclusion and say you have the right answer, but just remaining open as an exploration. Just start to explore that possibility, even if it seems really challenging or confusing or difficult. It's just look at it just as an exercise in flexibility, an exercise in opening to new and potentially more helpful or resourceful modes of perceiving and experiencing. Now, you might start to notice that, from a somatic perspective, time is maybe not so linear. So you notice that you can uh, you can easily uh, jump around in what you would otherwise consider to be a linear timeline. There's a whole types of therapy based on this. Like one's called timeline therapy, where you but timeline therapy usually still perceives linearly. But the notion that you are not locked into time is at least part of that that form of therapy. But here you can take it even further, and you can realize it's not even linear. That time is appearing to you in a non-linear fashion. So you can somatically, you could be uh, 5 years old. You could be, depending on how old you perceive yourself to be presently, you could probably easily imagine yourself to be, or perceive yourself somatically as being 5 years younger than your chronological age. Or you could um, also perceive yourself as being older than your chronological age. So now, perhaps because this somatic experience is less rigid, it enables us to be able to uh, perceive more fluidly and thereby experience more fluidly. And then, as we hopefully see in our experiences with these explorations, that translates into greater flexibility, both in our physical bodies, our emotional bodies, and our psychic bodies and thought bodies. Okay. So now let's explore things in a what we more classically, uh, in terms of like somatics, classically somatic fashion. So for this exploration, which we'll be doing a little bit of movement, you can choose any posture that you like. I'll invite you, though, if you're comfortable doing so, to try it lying down on your back with your knees bent and your feet on the floor near to your buttocks, comfortable distance apart. So your knees are forward relative to your sense of self. Since you're lying on the back, it would mean the knees are in the direction of the ceiling. And but if that's uncomfortable for you, you can, as I say, you can choose any other posture. Um, Ideally, though, it would be great if you do have room to be able to give yourself enough room that you could theoretically at least reach your arms directly overhead. So, meaning if you're lying on your back, that you'd ideally be able to reach your arm so that it would be resting on the surface beneath you, with the hand and arm above the head. And so, but to begin with, you can have your arms resting at the sides if that's comfortable for you. So take a moment and just notice uh, how whatever the low hanging fruit is that you can let go of, so that you can surrender to this moment, so that you're not unnecessarily limiting yourself, unnecessarily exhausting yourself, so that you can actually just be receiving the support that's here. And when you really start to tune in to the somatic experience, you can notice, and I hope this is clear because this is what I was really trying to get at with the whole preamble, is that you habitually reference your ideas, your model of yourself, and that dramatically limits what is possible for you in to realize. So what I mean by that is, notice when I even suggest that you could maybe have your arm resting on the surface that you're lying on, overhead, and be comfortable and breathing. That you might immediately think to yourself, "Oh no, that's not going to happen for me." Notice, though, if that happens, why that is. And what you'll see is you reference a model, a mental model that you have. You're referencing the past. You're referencing your ideas of yourself that limit you, and then you subtly, but nonetheless, you produce or induce a somatic replication of that mental model, or the limitations of that mental model. In other words, you create within yourself the feeling of that restriction, the feeling of that discomfort, the feeling of the uh, fear or the pain or the whatever, however you perceive it. And that gives you a sense that that limitation is real. It's another really important point, which is that the somatic experience is what gives a sense of reality to our experience. Without that, it would not seem real. And unknowingly, unconsciously, all the time, we're inducing particular somatic states to uh, uh, how do I to confirm or validate our limitations at the mental level. So we say, I can't. How do you know that you can't? Because of the somatic experience. You say you're tired, you're exhausted. How do you know that? Because of the somatic experience. So there's this interplay going on. And I'm hoping that you can start to notice that as you inhabit the somatic experience more and more fully, that you realize directly that you have inherently much greater freedom than what you otherwise would imagine. And so when you don't have the when you're not able to fully manifest that freedom at a physical level, instead of making the usual but unhelpful assumption that that's just because this external reality or the physical reality dictates everything, that the material substance is the supreme reality that determines everything, uh, and that there's just some kind of malfunction or damage or uh, or what's another, God, there's another, I can't think of a word to describe it. There's another notion that we often have. It's like a defect. There's a good word. There's some defect. So it's like, well, maybe most humans could do that, but I can't do it. There's something just defective about me or abnormal about me, because and I went to the specialist and they did some imaging and they said, well, there it is. They pointed it out to me. I have an unusually shaped this, that, or the other, or my one leg is longer than the other, or uh, there because there's no cartilage there in that socket or whatever. For those reasons, I can't. But that's taking a mental model and overlaying that and saying that is the truth, and then we make everything conform to that. So your whole reality becomes shaped by that. And through the exploration of somatics, or rather the exploration of the somatic experience, we free ourselves from that so that we're no longer uh, artificially limited in that way. We can bit by bit begin to liberate ourselves from that. So you're lying down, perhaps, or if not, you're in some other position. And I want you to let go of whatever you can let go of so that you can be supported here as best you can. And if you experience any discomfort, strain, and you don't seem to be able to let go of it, then I just want you to know, or just open to the possibility that that's only because you're still at a level that you're not able to yet penetrate consciously, but which you will be able to. You're still doing the same thing that I've just described, which is that you're consulting a mental model of limitation, and then you're involuntarily producing that at a somatic level to reinforce the validity of your mental limitation. Hannah describes this. He saw it all the time in his private practice. that people come in. Oh, here's a really interesting one. This is from Jung. There was some Carl Jung. Uh, there was a case. He was he was in a, he was teaching psychoanalysts, and he was he had this woman come in to as a to demonstrate some technique that was he was going to he demonstrated hypnosis, and she had some kind of, I don't remember what it was, some kind of condition that at the time and probably still today would generally be considered to be caused by some kind of material thing. Like, I don't remember what it was like. I wish I could remember what it was. But it was some physical ailment, and somewhat severe. And this he hypnotized her just to demonstrate, I think, just to demonstrate the technique. And then she leapt out of the chair and was instantly cured. And she thanked him profusely, and apparently she was cured from there on out. You know, it's like like, you know, miracle cure of Jesus kind of thing. You know, it's like the cripple who, you know, can suddenly walk. And it was somewhat embarrassing because this was not what Carl Jung was aiming at, and he couldn't explain it. But here we see that really, truly, this is what is happening. Is in so many cases, people, and this is also an insight of Sarno, who I often refer to, is that we are unconsciously producing these somatic states, which then cripple the body, but not because they're, and can cause physical damage to the body, but it's not because of physical damage that we have the experience. We have the experience, which then can produce the damage. The experience is because we are doing that to ourselves, but unconsciously. So you're breathing, and you're letting go of whatever you can let go of, and whatever you don't seem to be able to let go of, just know that it's presently, it's it's still unconscious. So it can be either, it can be released either by being made conscious, or just through the process of exploration. So you need to know that, you need to remember that, because so quickly we fall back into this materialist position in which we say, but my mental model is the truth. What I've seen in the medical imaging is the truth. My age, my chronological age is the truth. My image of my body is the truth. What people have told me is the truth. Instead of trusting in the direct experience, the somatic experience. So we want to keep coming back to that and see how quickly the old patterns reassert themselves, and how quick we are to numb out and go zone out and go unconscious, and allow those patterns to take us over. So as you're breathing, notice that the breath itself is a dynamic process. So the contrast that we experience somatically, meaning the movement, the experience of movement, not the idea of the movement, not the mechanical process of movement, not the names of the muscles involved, not any of that, but the actual direct experience of the movement, which is a contrast. You can just notice there's a contrast, meaning that when there's, well, we could say, when you perceive stillness, then there's a kind of homogeneous, non-changing. But movement is the perception of change. It's the perception uh, of of that. So then notice that the breath is a movement. So see that you can tune into the breath as in a somatic sense. So see how you maybe tend to consult a mental image of the breath, and instead see that you can just tune in directly to the sense of movement, just this sense of contrast, the direct perception of the breath without having to overlay any kind of mental image or model. And then what you can start to do is notice, how is this experience? Is it satisfying? Is it free? Is it pleasant? Perhaps even pleasurable? Or if it's not those things, what is it? And if you notice that there's any kind of unpleasantness or sense of limitation or discomfort, dissatisfaction, that if you start to experience it, just tune into it as a somatic experience, just purely, then you can start to find the ease and the openness and the pleasure in the experience. Because if you're consulting the mental overlay, then you're trying to figure out what you need to do. You have to have a plan. You have to know what you're going to do. You easily get confused. Too many things to be aware of. Should I do this? Should I do that? Should I pay attention to this body part or that body part? But if you just tune into the somatic experience, then what you start to notice is you notice it in terms of just quality. Like, is it pleasant? Is it pleasurable? If not, then you just start to invite more of what you want. You don't have to figure out how. All you have to do is figure out what you want. Because as you start to figure out what, you start to just notice somatically how you're doing what it is that you don't want. Because if the breath feels restricted, why would that be? It have to be because you, or at least, well, you are restricting it. I say it has to be. So says me. But I think it's a useful way to view it, at least. Okay, so now see that the breath can, of course, when we're stuck in a mechanical mode, then the breath tends to become mechanical, which is ultimately dissatisfying. So as you're opening to a more satisfying somatic experience, you probably start to notice that the breath becomes less mechanical rather than just being inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. You start to notice that you inhale as long as that is satisfying to do so. And then when you're done inhaling, that you can just simply enjoy the satisfaction and pleasantness of that experience that appears at the cessation of inhalation, which may extend for some amount of time or may not, but maybe a few seconds before you then begin to exhale. And the exhalation, rather than being some mechanical, forceful exhalation, Similarly, is you tune into the somatic experience, the quality of it, and you allow it and open to it being a pleasant, satisfying experience rather than trying to figure out mechanically how to produce that. You just go directly to opening to that. So, similarly, then at the end of the exhalation, which is just happening as long as it is satisfying and pleasant to do so without force or strain, then maybe there's some amount of time in which it's satisfying simply just to experience that pause without trying to hold your breath, but just to experience what that is prior to the next inhalation. But you start to notice that it's not a mechanical overlay, it's not some idea and not some image that is driving the whole thing. Rather, it's the direct perception, it's the felt experience, it's tuning into the pleasure of it and opening to the pleasure of it. And in that way, the pleasure of it can grow, expand. Okay, so we've explored recently, a couple weeks ago, how we used a yogic technique, which is Uddiyana Kriya, at the bottom of the exhalation, and that we could do movement uh, during that application of that Kriya, and that can be a very interesting and fruitful exploration. So I hope that you've been, well, I hope you, yeah, I hope you've explored that to whatever capacity is appropriate for you. And if it's appropriate for you to do so today, you're welcome to explore that in the context of what we're doing. The movement that I'd like us to explore on top of the movement of the breath now is moving the arms. We're going to keep the arms straight, and so they're going to pivot at the shoulder, and we're going to explore just simply moving the arm in that range of motion so that it's an arc where the hand moves from the near to the hip to forward and then to above the head, and only in the range that is comfortable for you and not any other. So it's not about how far can you move the arm above the head. It's about doing so in a way that is pleasurable and smooth and slow. So we're still applying the same principles of somatic exploration that we've looked at in other lessons. So slow, smooth, continuous. And you can feel free to do it in any way that you find best. So you could move each arm independently. You could move the arms together. If you're moving them together, you could keep the hands apart, like a shoulder width apart, or you could touch the sides of the fingers together. Whatever, try them out and see what works nicely for you. And what I'd like you to do as you're exploring this movement is notice where, when and where in the range of motion you start to encounter the resistance to the pleasure of it. So presumably for most of us, there's some point in that range of motion at which it starts to lose the quality of pleasure. becomes strained, we start to have experiences of that we perceive as being unpleasant in some way, maybe a sense of urgency, a sense of impatience, a sense of irritation, any number of ways that you could interpret it, but just notice where that starts to occur. And then really pay attention to that. So you can, if it's comfortable for you to do so, at least you can, for a little bit, keep your range of motion around that general area where you start to notice the resistance, so that you're moving kind of in and out of that resistance slowly, so you can start to familiarize yourself with, where is that resistance experienced? What is it that you can, how are you doing that? And here you may find, in fact, you'll probably find that if you can do the Uddiyana Kriya for brief moments during this exploration, it may be particularly helpful. I will also suggest that you can, if you're comfortable doing so, and certainly not if you're not, and if you've been diagnosed with high blood pressure and that's a concern of yours, then you may want to skip this. That's up to you. But you can also, as long as you're not closing the glottis in order to do so, you can also allow that pause at the top of the inhalation to be sustained, meaning that it's sustained by the use of the respiratory muscles, not by closing the glottis and increasing the pressure inside of the chest. You'll find similar benefits doing that and doing the movement while the breath is retained in that way as well at the top of the inhalation. Similar results as when doing the Uddiyana Kriya at the bottom of the exhalation. So just notice, and don't fatigue yourself. So you rest whenever you need, and just the idea here is to start to notice how there's a limitation, there's a resistance that appears, and that commonly, we just accept it as that's just how things are, and we justify it because we've got some idea, a mental overlay, and that is backed up by the unconscious resistance that we produce somatically. But we want to become conscious so that we're relieving ourselves of those unconscious habits of unnecessary limitation and dysfunction. So what you might find as you do this is that you can, bit by bit, extend that range of motion with more confidence and ease. So you don't push. There's no prize for who can move their arms through the largest range of motion, other than your own personal prize of greater freedom, should you find how to move in a greater range of motion through this somatic exploration, not through force. Because if you do it through force, you'll just hurt yourself. But as you start to notice how it is that you've been unconsciously producing that resistance, that strain, and you start to learn that you can keep that from engaging, that you can become conscious of it and you can release that habit, you'll start to notice that it's maybe shocking how much chronic tension you were holding, how how that it has impacted your physical body, that your physical torso has been as if in a vice, that your chest was restricted, that it wasn't able to move freely, perhaps because of, well, almost certainly because of chronic tension held in the core. Not exclusively in the core, because it's going to radiate outward, but you'll find almost certainly that your inability, seeming inability, to move your arms overhead in a smooth, comfortable way, pleasurable way, is because of tension, chronic gripping that's maintained in the core. So you'll find that that has all far-reaching negative impacts. It negatively impacts your digestion, negatively impacts your breathing, and of course, all of that negatively impacts everything else: your sleep, your mood, your intellectual abilities. Everything is negatively impacted by that chronic, unconscious limitation. So notice, I hope you notice that when you, as you're moving and exploring in this way, that you find that you can become conscious of those patterns of limitation, and you can consciously begin to release them. So here's the next thing: is be really aware of when the habit is to re-engage those patterns of holding tension. So and remember, don't fatigue yourself. So rest as often as you need. But just whenever you're ready, come back to the same exploration. So you're just moving the arm or arms in this arc and finding where the habits of restriction are, so that you can become conscious of them and you can consciously begin to release them. Now notice that you'll find that you can release hopefully you'll find that you can release some of that gripping, some of that tension, and you'll find, yes, you can move the arm a little further with adequate ease and comfort, at least. And then this is the thing I'm pointing at now, is become very aware of when you move the arm in the opposite direction. So you move the arm in whichever way you're moving it, and you find that you can find some greater freedom, some greater ease, some opening there. When you then next move the arm in the opposite direction, be very conscious and aware of when the habit of tensing up again tries to assert itself. And what you'll notice is that normally it goes undetected consciously, but when you notice it consciously, you'll recognize that it's very familiar. This is the interesting thing about this, is that you were not aware of it consciously, so you have no idea what you're really looking for, but you're just watching, and you'll miss it many times. You'll be moving and you'll miss it. You'll find the release, and then you'll move in the other direction, and the whole old habit will reassert itself, and you'll miss it completely. And then you'll go in the opposite direction again, and there you'll find the release, but it will be the same release. And you can go over and over and over it, over and over and over it for so long, get the release, and you recontract, and you get the release, and you recontract, and you say, well, why am I so stuck? You have to be aware, conscious of when that habit of tension reasserts itself. And at that moment, you must pause and don't do it. You must release again. You must be so aware that you can do the movement without that unnecessary tension. So like I say, it's it's very familiar. It's not something unfamiliar, but it's unconscious until the moment when it becomes conscious. Then you must stay with it and slow down even more and consciously continue to release that so that you can have the experience of being able to move through that range continuously and fluidly, repeatedly, without re-engaging that unnecessary tension. And this will then help you to regain conscious voluntary control. But it has to happen first somatically, and then it uh, radiates, I guess we could say, into the physical body. So just to reinforce this point, because it's such an important one, what I want you to also notice is that and I just want to remind you, please don't exhaust yourself. So rest anytime you need, and don't push and try to force anything. Be gentle. Whatever that range is for you is the right range. But the thing I want to really reinforce here is that when you find that release, that openness that you can open to, at that whatever that range is, where you start to notice the resistance and then you can release the resistance, at least a little bit. I want you to notice that at that point, that openness that you are experiencing somatically can, and in fact, we could say should be experienced continuously in this entire movement. That is to say, that when the arm is completely overhead, now I'm not suggesting it should be that you should achieve that right now, but I'm just saying, in theory, when the arm is completely overhead, we might have an idea that that is somehow going to be much more open. Well, in some sense, some muscles will be more lengthened, some will be shortened, though. But that notion, the idea that we have of openness, or whatever that, maybe you have a different word that you would use there, maybe doesn't have as positive a connotation, but whatever that experience is, we associate that idea with the particular somatic state, which is not necessarily accurate. And so we then, because we're subtly operating from that mental overlay, we continue to fall back into the same pattern of recontracting, particularly as we bring the arms back down. So we're unconsciously contracting, typically, as we bring the arms back down toward the hips. And so I want you to notice that, allow for all of that to remain relaxed. So in other words, if you're lying down on your back, the floor or whatever you're lying on is supporting you. You don't need to be worried about being bent backwards, for example, because you're supported. So you have no need whatsoever to tighten the abdominal muscles. So whatever degree of release is found in the abdominal muscles when the arm is up in the direction of overhead, that can be maintained through the entire range of motion. So I hope that's clear. I hope that I know that was a lot of stuff, but I hope that it's you're finding the practical benefit of it, because and to wrap it up and close everything here, to bring it together, that through this simple exploration, you can and should find that yes, you can move with greater ease in the physical body, you can breathe with greater ease, and you your uh, your idea of yourself is freed from unnecessary constraints, that you're able to have greater flexibility in perception, that you're um, less likely to uh, perceive problems, that you'll more readily see opportunities. And so all of that is not only possible, but probable, I would say, through, or inevitable through the correct application of the exploration. So I hope that you're seeing that. As always, if you have any questions, doubts, concerns, or anything else, please do let me know. And that's it for today. So thank you so much for joining me, and I'll see you all next time. Blessings to you all. Bye for now.